The black maid protected an elderly guest from a falling prop, and the Mafia boss stepped forward speechless. Jasmine Carter, the black maid, had always known her place in the grand scheme of things. Working in the luxurious mansion of the Castellano family, she kept her head down, did her job, and made sure to stay out of the way of the powerful guests and the family members she served. She was used to being invisible, just another worker, another face in the background. The mansion itself, with its marble floors and towering chandeliers, was a world so far removed from her own life. The guests were often wealthy, arrogant, and dismissive of people like her. But today was different. The grand ballroom was filled with the hum of chatter as guests mingled, and everything seemed to be going smoothly until it wasn't. The stage had been set for a performance, a prop hanging above the elderly guest, Margaret Hayes, who was sitting in a velvet chair near the center of the room. Suddenly, without warning, the prop began to sway and break free from its rigging. Time seemed to slow as Jasmine noticed the danger and acted without thinking. She rushed forward, leaping to shield Margaret from the falling object. It all happened in a split second. The prop crashed to the floor just inches away from the elderly woman. The guests gasped, and a hush fell over the room. Jasmine stood, panting, her heart racing, her hands trembling as she helped Margaret to her feet. The elderly woman, shaken but unharmed, looked at Jasmine in disbelief. "You saved my life," Margaret said, her voice thick with emotion. But just as the moment seemed to settle, the unexpected happened. Victor Castellano, the Mafia boss, stepped into the room. His usual calm, authoritative presence made the air around him feel colder, more intense. He surveyed the scene with a sharp eye, his gaze landing on Jasmine. The room fell silent as he walked toward her, his footsteps deliberate and heavy. The tension in the air was palpable as Victor stopped just in front of Jasmine. For a moment, there was only the sound of his breathing, steady and controlled. Then, to everyone's surprise, Victor said nothing. He simply looked at Jasmine with a mixture of awe and something deeper, something unexpected. Jasmine stood frozen, unsure of what would happen. Next, the guests, still in shock from the near disaster, exchanged glances, waiting for the Mafia boss to speak. But instead of the expected reprimand or cold dismissal, Victor stepped closer. The room held its breath as he looked at the maid, his expression unreadable. His lips parted as if to say something, but then there was only silence. Victor Castellano, the man known for his ruthlessness, had no words. What had just unfolded in front of him, what Jasmine had done for the elderly guest, had rendered him speechless. I hope everyone is following along, because what happened next was something no one could have predicted. Victor Castellano, the Mafia boss who owned the mansion, stood in front of Jasmine Carter, still processing what he had just witnessed. His usual cold, unfeeling demeanor was nowhere to be found. The man who had ruled over empires and struck fear into the hearts of his enemies was speechless. Jasmine's quick thinking and bravery had saved Margaret Hayes, an elderly guest, from a potential disaster. Yet Victor remained silent, his intense gaze locked on her, as if trying to understand the depth of what she had done. The room, still stunned from the near catastrophe, held its breath. Jasmine stood there, uncertain of what would come next. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone receiving praise or admiration. But here she was, standing in front of the most powerful man in the room, her heart racing with nerves and uncertainty. For a moment, the tension was so thick, it felt as though the air itself had frozen. Victor's silence seemed to stretch on forever, and Jasmine could feel the weight of every second pressing down on her. But then, without warning, Victor took a step closer to her. His presence was overpowering, as always. The Mafia boss towered over her, his sharp features etched in a mixture of confusion and something else, something Jasmine couldn't quite place. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, as though he had just realized she wasn't just another maid in his household. He looked at her as though she were something more. "You saved her," Victor finally spoke, his voice low and steady. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, one that hung in the air between them, as if the very act of speaking it required a shift in the world around them. Jasmine swallowed hard, her throat dry, and nodded. She hadn't really thought about it. In that moment, when she saw the prop falling toward Margaret, all she had cared about was getting there in time, protecting her. She hadn't hesitated. She had simply acted. "I couldn't just let it happen," she said quietly, her voice almost lost in the room. Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, he studied her as though trying to read her. But there was something different about his gaze now. It was softer, more thoughtful than it had ever been before. Something inside him had shifted. Jasmine wasn't sure what had changed in him, but she knew that, for the first time, she was no longer just the maid. She had done something that had caught the attention of someone who had never even looked her way before. Victor let out a long breath, his expression unreadable. He looked back at the room, his guests still standing in shock, and nodded sharply. The tension that had filled the air seemed to dissipate with his movement. "Get back to your seats," he ordered the guests. "The show will continue in a moment." His voice carried that authoritative tone that brooked no argument, and the guests quickly complied, resuming their conversations, though still in whispers. Victor turned back to Jasmine, his gaze lingering on her for a beat longer than usual. "You did well," he said, his voice still steady, but there was something in the way he said it, something almost personal. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. She had never heard those words from anyone, let alone from him. She had always been the invisible one, the one who worked quietly in the background, never noticed unless she made a mistake. But now, standing in front of Victor Castellano, she had earned his recognition, his respect, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For a moment, there was a silence between them, the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Then Victor took another step back, his eyes returning to their usual coldness, but there was a flicker of something deeper there, something that hadn't been there before. "Get back to work," he said, his tone softer than usual, though still firm. Jasmine nodded quickly and turned to walk away, her heart still pounding in her chest. As she walked back into the shadows of the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the air. Something had changed in her. For the first time, she wasn't just the maid. She was someone who had earned the Mafia boss's attention, someone who had made a difference. And in that moment, Jasmine realized that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. I hope you're all still with us because this story is only getting more interesting. Jasmine Carter walked away from Victor Castellano, her mind racing with everything that had just happened. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the hallway, and for the first time, the mansion felt different. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't invisible. It had been hours since the incident in the ballroom, but the moment kept playing in her head. She had always known her place in this grand house, quiet, unnoticed, and hardworking. But today, things had changed. The way Victor had looked at her, his words, they had been unlike anything she had ever experienced. She found herself standing in the kitchen, staring at the polished counters, trying to focus on the task at hand. But it was impossible. The weight of the moment hung over her. She had never seen Victor like that before, so vulnerable, so human. He had always been a figure of power, someone whose mere presence made everyone in the room stand straighter, whose decisions were final and never questioned. But today, Jasmine had seen something else in him, something softer, something that made her wonder if he saw her as more than just an employee. She shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. No, she couldn't think like that. She was just a maid, and he was the Mafia boss. There was no space for anything else. But the thought lingered. Suddenly, she heard footsteps approaching, and her heart skipped a beat. She turned around quickly, expecting to see one of the other staff members, but instead, it was Victor. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his usual air of authority present, but there was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite read. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low and steady, just like it had been earlier. Her name sounded different coming from him. "I need to talk to you." Jasmine's heart started to race. She hadn't expected this. What did he want to say? She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Come with me," he instructed, stepping aside so she could follow him. Without thinking, Jasmine obeyed, her legs moving almost of their own accord. As they walked through the mansion's grand hallways, Jasmine felt a strange mix of emotions. She had always tried to stay out of Victor's way, but now, in his presence, she couldn't help but feel an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. They reached a quiet room at the back of the house, away from the noise of the party. Victor pushed the door open and motioned for her to sit. She did so, her hands folded in her lap, unsure of what to expect. Victor sat across from her, his eyes never leaving her face. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then he spoke again, his voice softer than usual. "I've been thinking about what happened earlier," he said. "You saved her." Jasmine nodded, but she didn't know what to say. She had done what anyone would have done in her position. "That wasn't just a moment of instinct," Victor continued, his tone serious. "You acted when everyone else froze. You showed courage when most people would have run." His words were a surprise to her. She had never expected him to acknowledge her actions, let alone praise them. But there was something in his eyes, something that made her heart skip a beat. Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded again, unsure of what to say. Victor studied her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful. "I don't know what it is about you, Jasmine," he said finally. "But you're different. You've been different from the moment you stepped into this house." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Jasmine's pulse quickened, and she had to swallow hard to steady herself. "I don't know what you mean," she said quietly, though she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. Victor leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "You're not like the others," he said. "You don't crave attention, and you don't ask for anything in return. You just do your job and take care of others. But I've seen the way. You protect those around you. The way you care." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had always done her best to stay in the background, to keep to herself, but it seemed that Victor had noticed something she hadn't even known was there. "I'm just trying to do what's right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor was silent for a long moment, and Jasmine could feel the weight of his gaze on her. It was a strange, heavy feeling, one she couldn't quite place. "You don't have to explain yourself," he finally said, his voice quieter now. "I understand more than you think." Jasmine didn't know what to say. She had never been in a position like this before. She was just the maid, the invisible worker in the background. But for the first time, it seemed that she was seen. It was a feeling that both comforted and unnerved her. "I've made a decision," Victor said suddenly, his voice firm. Jasmine looked up at him, waiting for him to continue. "You're going to take a break. I want you to rest. You've earned it." Jasmine's eyes widened in surprise. "Rest?" she repeated, confused. Victor nodded. "Yes. Go home for the night. Take the time you need. You've done more than enough today." Jasmine didn't know how to respond. She had never been given such a command before. But the idea of leaving the mansion, of stepping out of the world she had known for so long, was both strange and welcome. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice soft. Victor nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer before he stood up. "Get some rest, Jasmine. You deserve it." And with that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. "I hope you're all still with us, because what happened next is a turn of events that no one could have predicted." Jasmine Carter, still in disbelief from the conversation she'd had with Victor Castellano, found herself walking out of the mansion that evening. The night had taken a strange and unexpected turn. She had been given an opportunity to leave, to rest, something that had never been offered to her before. She stepped out into the cool night air, the quiet of the world outside the mansion contrasting sharply with the chaos that had unfolded. Earlier, the lights of the city shimmered in the distance, and Jasmine could feel the weight of the events weighing on her. She had always been used to working hard, to being invisible, to doing everything without expecting recognition. But today had been different. The unexpected praise from Victor, the Mafia boss who ruled this mansion, still echoed in her mind. She couldn't help but wonder why he had said those words to her. She had done nothing special, just reacted in the moment. But somehow, it had caught his attention. As Jasmine walked through the streets, heading toward her small apartment, her thoughts swirled. She had been working in that mansion for months, trying to keep her head down, doing her job, and surviving. She had never sought attention, never wanted to stand out. But now, she was thinking about everything that had happened. She thought about the way Victor had looked at her, the way his voice had softened when he spoke to her. It was almost as if, for the first time, he had seen her as something more than just the help. It was a feeling Jasmine wasn't used to. She had always believed she was nothing more than a background figure in this grand world of wealth and power. But today, she had been noticed. And somehow, that realization made her feel both stronger and more vulnerable at the same time. By the time Jasmine reached her apartment, the weight of the day's events had worn her down. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. the familiar smell of her modest home greeting her. She tossed her bag on the small table by the door and sank into the couch, her thoughts still racing. It had been a long day, and she needed time to process everything that had happened. She thought about the elderly guest, Margaret, and the way she had looked at her with gratitude in her eyes after Jasmine had saved her from the falling prop. She thought about Victor and how he had praised her, something she never expected from someone like him. But the more she thought about it, the more questions arose. Why had he treated her so differently? Was it because of her actions that day? Or was there something else going on? Jasmine shook her head, trying to quiet the thoughts racing in her mind. She couldn't keep overthinking things. But deep down, she knew this wasn't just any ordinary day. Something had shifted. The next morning, as the sun began to rise and cast a soft glow over the city, Jasmine returned to the mansion. The world outside seemed peaceful, but she couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't as simple as they seemed. As she entered the mansion, the usual bustle of the staff greeted her, but today, it felt different. The air felt heavier, more charged. She found herself walking toward the kitchen, trying to regain some sense of normalcy. But then, as she passed the hallway leading to the grand ballroom, she saw Victor again. He was standing there, alone, his back to her as he stared out a large window. Jasmine paused, unsure of what to do. For a moment, she debated whether to approach him or not. But something inside her pushed her forward. "Victor," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned, his sharp gaze meeting hers. His eyes softened just slightly when he saw her, and for the first time, Jasmine saw a flicker of something more than the cold, controlled man she was used to. "Jasmine," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't expect you to be back so soon." She shrugged slightly, feeling a little nervous under his gaze. "I didn't have anywhere else to go," she said. Victor nodded, his expression unreadable. "You've been doing well here," he said, his voice steady. "But I wanted to talk to you. Something has changed." Jasmine felt her heart skip a beat. Was he going to reprimand her for something? Or was he going to acknowledge what had happened the previous day? "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Victor's eyes met hers, and for a moment, there was a brief silence between them. Then, he stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "You've shown me something I didn't expect," he said, his voice low and intense. "I've spent my life controlling everything, manipulating situations, but you—" He paused, as though searching for the right words. "You've changed something. In me. And I don't know how to deal with it." Jasmine felt her breath catch in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. This was nothing like what she had expected. Victor Castellano, the man who ran the show, was admitting something she never thought she'd hear. "I never meant to change anything," she said quietly. "I just did what I thought was right." Victor looked at her, his gaze more searching now, as if he were trying to understand her completely. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "doing what's right changes everything." Jasmine could feel the weight of his words, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. She wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but she knew one thing for certain. Everything was different now, and she couldn't go back to the way things were before. "I hope you're ready for what happens next, because this is the turning point." After their conversation, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted permanently. The power dynamics in the mansion, once so clear, seemed to blur in ways she couldn't quite understand. She had always kept her distance, knowing her place as the help, but now, with Victor's words echoing in her mind, everything felt different. As the days passed, Jasmine found herself struggling with the uncertainty of it all. She tried to focus on her work, doing what she always did, but her mind kept drifting back to the moments she had shared with Victor. Every time he passed by her, there was that same look in his eyes, a mixture of something unreadable, something that made her stomach twist. She had never been the type to imagine a different life, to dream of a life outside the walls of the mansion. But now, with everything changing, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more for her, something she had never dared to hope for. One evening, after another long day of work, Jasmine found herself in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, lost in her thoughts. She had always preferred the quiet of the kitchen, the solitude that came with it. But tonight, there was a strange stillness in the air, one that felt heavy, almost as if something was about to happen. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching, and before she could even turn around, she felt Victor's presence behind her. He was standing in the doorway, just watching her, his figure silhouetted against the soft light from the hallway. "Jasmine," he said, his voice softer than usual. She froze, her heart racing. She hadn't expected him to come find her. She hadn't expected anything, really. "Yes?" she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor stepped forward, his gaze never leaving her face. "I've been thinking about everything we talked about," he said, his tone serious. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor was silent for a moment, and Jasmine could feel the tension rising in the air between them. Then he spoke again, his words deliberate, as if he had carefully chosen them. "I want to offer you something," he said, his voice low but steady. Jasmine blinked, confusion filling her mind. "Offer me something?" she repeated, not sure she understood what he meant. "Yes," Victor said, stepping closer. "You've proven yourself in ways I didn't expect. You've shown me that you're more than just a maid, Jasmine. You're someone who sees things differently, someone who isn't afraid to act when it matters." He paused, letting his words sink in. Jasmine stood there, unsure of how to react. She wasn't used to hearing this from him, wasn't used to being seen like this. "What are you offering me?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Victor looked at her, his eyes intense. "I'm offering you a chance," he said, his gaze unwavering. "A chance to leave this place, to do something different. I'm offering you a way out." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. A way out? Could he really be offering her that? She had never thought she would have the option to leave, to walk away from the only life she had ever known. But here it was, in front of her, a possibility she had never dared to dream of. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Victor's eyes softened, and for the first time, Jasmine saw something resembling vulnerability in him. "You don't have to say anything," he said quietly. "I just wanted you to know that the choice is yours. I'm not going to force you to stay here. You've earned more than this." Jasmine stood there, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had never imagined she would be faced with a choice like this. She had always believed that this life was all she would ever have. But now, Victor was offering her the chance to leave, to find something else, something beyond the walls of this mansion. For the first time, Jasmine felt as if she had control over her future. "I need time to think," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Victor nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But know that I meant what I said. The choice is yours." With that, he turned and left the kitchen, leaving Jasmine standing there, her mind racing. She had never imagined she would be faced with a decision like this. She had always thought she was trapped in her life, that there was no way out. But now, the door was open. What would she do? What was her future going to look like now? As she stood there, alone in the quiet kitchen, she realized that everything had changed. She wasn't the same person who had entered this mansion all those months ago. And maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to finally live a life that was hers. One that was filled with possibilities she had never dared to consider before. I hope you're ready for what's coming next, because this part is about to get even more intense. The days that followed Victor's offer were filled with uncertainty. Jasmine Carter found herself torn between two worlds. She had always lived in the shadows of the Castellano mansion, a quiet worker, unnoticed and unimportant. But now, she was standing on the edge of a decision that could change her life forever. Each day, as she walked the halls of the mansion, she couldn't stop thinking about what Victor had said. He had offered her a chance to leave, to start a new life. The idea of freedom, of a life outside the walls of this luxurious prison, was tempting. But at the same time, the thought of leaving everything she had ever known, all the people she had worked for and with, was terrifying. It was a choice she never thought she would have to make. One morning, as Jasmine walked into the kitchen to begin her daily routine, she was greeted with an unexpected sight. Victor was there, standing by the window, looking out over the grounds. His posture was tense, as if he was deep in thought. When he heard her approach, he turned and looked at her. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low. She stopped in her tracks, unsure of what to expect. It had been days since they had spoken, and yet, she could still feel the weight of their last conversation hanging between them. "We need to talk," Victor said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. Jasmine's heart began to race. She knew this conversation was important, but she didn't know what direction it would take. "What's on your mind?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor's gaze softened slightly. "I've been thinking about your offer," she continued, her throat tight. "And I don't know what to do." There was a pause as Victor seemed to process her words. "It's not an easy decision," he said finally. "I know, but I'm not forcing you to leave. I want you to know that this is your choice. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to. You've earned that right." Jasmine felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had never imagined that someone like Victor would give her that kind of freedom, that kind of respect. It was a lot to process, and she knew she needed time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I just don't know what the future holds." Victor nodded, his expression unreadable. "I understand," he said softly. "But whatever you decide, know that I'll respect it." The conversation seemed to be over, but something lingered in the air between them. Jasmine could feel it, an unspoken tension, a shift in their dynamic that had never been there before. "Victor, she started, but he interrupted her. "You don't need to say anything," he said, his tone reassuring. "Just think about it. Take your time." He gave her one last look, then turned and walked away, leaving Jasmine standing in the kitchen, her thoughts swirling. She couldn't deny the truth. Everything had changed. The walls that had once seemed so solid were now crumbling, and Jasmine wasn't sure if she was ready to face the world outside. But there was something else, something deeper. She had always been invisible, just another face in the crowd. But now, for the first time, she felt seen. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear. Victor Castellano had changed the course of her life. That evening, as the mansion settled into its usual quiet, Jasmine found herself standing in front of the large mirror in her small room. She hadn't really looked at herself in a long time. But tonight, she studied her reflection, seeing herself in a new light. The woman staring back at her wasn't just the maid anymore. She was someone who had proven herself, someone who had earned respect, someone who had made a difference. For the first time, Jasmine felt like she was more than just a worker in the shadows. She was someone with choices. The realization hit her hard, and the weight of it almost made her dizzy. She had been given a chance to choose her path, to step out of the life she had always known. The question was, what would she do with it? As she sat down on the edge of her bed, the thoughts continued to swirl in her mind. She could leave the mansion, walk away from everything she had worked for, and start fresh. But could she truly leave behind everything that had defined her life for so long? Or would she stay, knowing that she had the respect of the man who had always been the most powerful in her world? It was a question with no easy answer. Jasmine sighed, running her fingers through her hair, trying to calm the storm inside her mind. The decision wasn't one she could make lightly. But for the first time, she realized something important. Whatever choice she made, it would be hers. And that was a power she had never felt before. I hope you're ready for what's about to unfold, because Jasmine's life is about to take another unexpected turn. The days since her conversation with Victor had been filled with a sense of restless anticipation. She spent her time in the mansion, going through the motions of her duties, but her mind was always elsewhere, caught between the choices Victor had given her and the life she had always known. It was clear that everything had changed. The once invisible Maid was now seen, and that realization weighed heavily on her. As much as she tried to focus on her tasks, her thoughts kept returning to Victor's words. He had given her a choice, a rare opportunity to leave the mansion and pursue something else, something beyond her current life. The idea of freedom was intoxicating, yet terrifying. Jasmine had always found comfort in routine, in the predictability of her daily life. But now, with the door to something new open before her, she was unsure of how to take that first step. It was one morning, as the soft light of dawn filtered through the tall windows of the mansion, that Jasmine found herself walking down the hallway toward the grand staircase. Her mind was clouded with thoughts, and for the first time, she wasn't entirely sure where she was heading. But then, as she rounded the corner, she saw Victor standing at the foot of the staircase, his back to her. He was alone, his usual entourage of bodyguards nowhere in sight. He stood tall, his posture rigid, but there was something different about him today, something more vulnerable. Jasmine hesitated, unsure if she should approach him. The memory of their last conversation lingered in her mind, and she couldn't help but wonder if he expected her to make a decision. She had been given a choice, but now, it felt like that choice was becoming a burden. As if sensing her presence, Victor turned, his eyes locking onto hers. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at her with that intense gaze that seemed to see straight through her. "Jasmine," he finally said, his voice quieter than usual. She took a tentative step forward, not sure what to say. "Victor," she replied softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking," he continued, his tone calm but heavy. "I know you're torn, and I can see it in your eyes. You're struggling with what comes next." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. It was as if he could read her mind. She had been trying to hide her uncertainty, to push down the fear that had been building inside her. But now, Victor had called it out. She nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've never had a choice like this before." Victor stepped closer, closing the distance between them. His presence was overpowering, but for once, it didn't feel intimidating. It felt comforting. "You don't have to make a decision right away," he said, his voice softening. "Take the time you need. But know that whatever you choose, I'll respect it. You have the power to choose your future, Jasmine." The weight of his words hung in the air, and, for the first time, Jasmine felt a sense of clarity. She had spent so long feeling like she was stuck in a cycle, like her life was already decided for her. But now, with Victor standing in front of her, offering her a chance to take control of her own destiny, she realized just how much power she really had. "I've always worked hard," she said quietly, looking down at her hands, "but I've never felt like I was going anywhere." Victor's gaze softened as he listened to her. He didn't rush her, didn't pressure her to say anything more. He simply allowed her to process her thoughts. "You've been strong, Jasmine," he said after a moment, his voice low. "Stronger than you realize. And that's why you deserve more than what you've been given here." Jasmine's eyes met his, and for the first time, she felt seen in a way she had never experienced before. The walls she had built around herself, the walls that kept her hidden and protected, were beginning to crumble. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as the realization began to settle in. This was her moment. She could choose. But was she ready to step into the unknown? Victor seemed to sense her hesitation. "I know this isn't easy," he said gently. "But you're not alone in this. Whatever decision you make, you don't have to face it alone." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat as his words sank in. It wasn't just about leaving or staying. It was about choosing herself for the first time. She had spent so long putting everyone else's needs ahead of her own, so long living for others, that the idea of living for herself felt foreign. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. "What if I make the wrong choice?" Victor stepped closer, his presence reassuring. "You won't fail, Jasmine. And there's no such thing as the wrong choice. You'll find your way, no matter what." Jasmine felt a wave of emotion wash over her as she looked at him. She had never felt so supported, so understood. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just a maid, a servant in the background. She was someone who had worth, who mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Victor gave her a small nod, his eyes softening. "Take your time. Think about what you want, and when you're ready, we'll figure it out together." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Jasmine standing there, feeling like she had just been given the greatest gift of all, freedom. As she watched him walk down the hall, she knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it. She had the power to choose her future, and that was all she needed. "I hope you're ready for what's coming next, because this is the turning point." Jasmine Carter stood in the same place Victor had left her, the weight of his words lingering in the air like a promise. She felt the cool breeze from the open window against her skin, a sensation she hadn't noticed before, as if the world outside was calling to her. She had been given a choice, and it was one that felt as heavy as it was freeing. For so long, she had lived within the constraints of her duties in the mansion, a silent figure in the background. But now, everything had changed. The door to a new life was wide open, and for the first time, she felt like she had the power to walk through it. She spent the rest of the day in a haze, her thoughts constantly returning to Victor's offer. The mansion felt quieter than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for her to make a decision. It wasn't just about leaving or staying. It was about finding herself, about choosing a future that wasn't dictated by the expectations of others. As evening approached, Jasmine found herself standing in front of her small apartment. She had barely noticed how much time had passed, so lost in her thoughts. The city around her buzzed with life, but she felt detached, as if she were standing outside of it all. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest, and she knew she needed to make up her mind. With a deep breath, she walked inside, closing the door behind her. She glanced around the room, the same small space she had called home for so long. It was modest, but it was hers. She had worked hard to keep it clean, to maintain some semblance of comfort in a life that often felt like a blur of routine. But now, that comfort felt suffocating. Jasmine knew that staying here, in the same place she had always been, would only hold her back. She had bigger dreams now. She wanted more. She needed more. As she sat down on the couch, her mind wandered back to Victor. His words still echoed in her mind, but now, they didn't feel so distant. The idea of a life outside the mansion, a life where she could make her own choices, seemed like a possibility she had never dared to imagine. But could she really leave everything behind? The people, the work, the security? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear: she had to try. The thought of facing the unknown was terrifying, but staying where she was, stuck in a life that wasn't truly hers, was even scarier. With a deep breath, Jasmine stood up, a new sense of determination rising in her chest. She didn't need to know every detail of her future to take the first step. She just needed to trust herself. And for the first time in a long while, she did. The next day, Jasmine returned to the mansion, her decision made. She walked through the familiar halls, but today, everything felt different. She wasn't just walking to do her job. She was walking toward a future that was all her own. She found herself outside Victor's office, the door slightly ajar. Her heart raced as she stood there for a moment, gathering her courage. She could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders, but it was a weight she now felt ready to carry. She knocked softly, and Victor's voice called out from inside. "Come in." Jasmine stepped inside, and for a moment, she didn't know what to say. Victor was standing by his desk, looking over some papers, but as soon as he saw her, he stopped and turned to face her. His expression softened when he saw her standing there, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that wasn't just authority. "Jasmine," he said, his voice calm. "You look like you've made up your mind." She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I have," she said, her voice steady. "I've decided that it's time for me to leave. I want to start a new life, something of my own." Victor's eyes searched hers, as if looking for any hesitation, any doubt. But there was none. Jasmine knew, deep down, that this was the right choice. "I understand," he said, his voice softer than usual. "It's not an easy decision, but it's your decision to make. And I'll respect it." There was a pause as the two of them stood in the quiet of the room, the air thick with unspoken words. Jasmine felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, fear, excitement. But above all, she felt a sense of freedom. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but filled with gratitude. "For everything." Victor nodded, his expression still thoughtful. "I wish you the best, Jasmine. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just the offer that surprised her, but the sincerity in his words. He wasn't just letting her go. He was acknowledging her choice with respect. "Thank you," she repeated, her voice thick with emotion. As she turned to leave the room, a sense of finality settled over her. This chapter of her life was coming to an end, and a new one was just beginning. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. Jasmine walked out of the mansion, the weight of the decision still on her shoulders, but no longer as a burden. She was free to make her own choices, to take control of her destiny. And with that, she stepped into the unknown, ready to build a life that was truly hers. I hope you're ready, because Jasmine's journey is about to take yet another unexpected turn. As the days passed, Jasmine found herself in unfamiliar territory. She had left the mansion, left behind the life she had known for so long, and stepped into a world that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The streets of the city were different now. They felt bigger, more open, as if the possibilities were endless. She had been so accustomed to the confines of the mansion, to the daily routine, that the freedom was overwhelming at first. Jasmine had never imagined that she would be free to make her own decisions, free to choose her own path. And yet, here she was, standing at the crossroads of her life, unsure of what to do next. She had always been a hard worker, always kept her head down, always focused on getting the job done. But now, for the first time, she had to focus on herself. She had to figure out what she wanted, what her future would look like. The first few days of freedom were disorienting. Jasmine spent most of her time walking the streets, lost in thought. She had never really thought about what she wanted beyond the life she had been given. She had always focused on survival, on making it through the day, the week, the month. But now she had time. Time to think. Time to dream. As the days went on, Jasmine began to meet people who offered her different perspectives. She met a woman at a local cafe who had once worked in a similar position and had gone on to start her own business. The woman shared her story with Jasmine, telling her how she had taken a chance on herself and had built something of her own. Jasmine was inspired. For the first time, she began to see a way forward. Maybe she could build something for herself, too. Maybe she could start fresh, follow a new path, and find a life that wasn't tied to the mansion or to the expectations that had been placed on her. But there were still doubts in her mind. She wasn't sure where to start or how to even begin. The world outside felt so big, so intimidating. Jasmine had always worked behind the scenes, doing the tasks that no one else wanted to do. But now, she had to take center stage in her own life, and that was terrifying. A week after leaving the mansion, Jasmine found herself sitting in a small, quiet park, watching the world go by. The trees were starting to show signs of spring, the air was warm, and people were out enjoying the day. It felt like the world was moving on without her, but for the first time, Jasmine wasn't running to catch up. She was just sitting there, waiting for the next step. And then, out of nowhere, she heard a voice. Jasmine. She turned around and saw a familiar face. It was Sophia, the head housekeeper from the mansion. She hadn't expected to see her here, in this place, so far from the world they had shared. Sophia looked just as she remembered, polished, confident, with a smile that could light up the room. Sophia, Jasmine said, a little surprised. What are you doing here? Sophia sat down beside her, her expression softening. I was just passing through, she said. I heard about what happened, about you leaving. Jasmine nodded, unsure of what to say. It felt strange to talk about it with someone from the mansion, someone who had always been a part of that world. I wanted to check in on you, Sophia continued, her tone kind. I know it must be difficult, leaving everything behind. Jasmine was silent for a moment, unsure of how to express the mix of emotions she was feeling. It's hard, she admitted. But it's also freeing, in a way. I never realized how much I was just going through the motions, not really living my own life. Sophia nodded, understanding. It's a big change, she said softly. But I think it's a good one. You've got the strength to do whatever you want, Jasmine. I've always known that. The words meant more than Jasmine expected. Sophia had always been someone who seemed to have everything under control, someone who had always known her place. And yet, here she was, offering Jasmine encouragement, offering her a reminder of her own strength. Thank you, Jasmine said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know what's next, but I know I have to keep moving forward. Sophia smiled warmly. You'll figure it out. You always do. After a moment, Jasmine stood up, feeling lighter than she had in days. I'll figure it out, she repeated, more to herself than to Sophia. The decision to leave the mansion had been hard, but it had been the right one. And now, she was ready to take the next step, whatever that might be. She said goodbye to Sophia, thanking her again for the encouragement, and as she walked away, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know exactly where she was going, but for the first time in a long while, she knew she was on the right path. The future was wide open, and she was ready to embrace it. Jasmine had stepped into the unknown, and while it was scary, it was also full of possibility. She didn't know what was ahead, but she knew she was ready to face it, no longer afraid of the choices that awaited her. She had taken control of her destiny, and that was all that mattered. I hope you're ready for the next chapter of Jasmine's journey because it's about to take a profound turn. After her encounter with Sophia, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of hope and determination. She was no longer the uncertain woman who had walked away from the mansion just days ago. Now, she had a clear understanding of what she wanted. She needed to forge her own path, and the first step was finding her own place in the world. The days following her conversation with Sophia were filled with moments of clarity. Jasmine spent her time reflecting on her strengths, the things that made her unique. She thought about the skills she had developed working in the mansion, her ability to stay calm under pressure, her attention to detail, and her resilience. These weren't just qualities of a maid. They were qualities of someone capable of more. She began to realize that she had more to offer than just her labor. Jasmine started reaching out to people she knew in the city, networking in a way she never had before. It was intimidating, but she was determined. She attended local workshops, met with people who had taken risks in their own lives, and gradually built a support system of people who saw her potential. The more Jasmine put herself out there, the more she realized that her future was wide open. The world was filled with possibilities, things she had never even considered before. It wasn't long before she found herself stepping into a new job, one that didn't just make use of her skills, but also challenged her to grow. She had become an administrative assistant at a local business, a small but rapidly growing company. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like a victory. For the first time, she was working in an environment where she was valued for more than just being in the background. Her confidence grew as she settled into her new routine. Every task she completed was a step toward something bigger, something better. And yet, as Jasmine continued to adjust to her new life, she couldn't shake the thought of Victor. Despite everything, she often found herself wondering what he was doing, how he was dealing with her absence. She had left the mansion, but the truth was, he had been a part of the most significant decision of her life. The realization that she had the power to choose her future, to step away from the shadows, was something she would never forget. One afternoon, a few weeks after she had started her new job, Jasmine received a phone call that would change everything. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, she was surprised to hear Victor's voice on the other end. "Jasmine," he said, his voice steady, yet there was something different about it. "It's been a while." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. She had left the mansion, left that part of her life behind. "Victor," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady, though she felt a wave of emotion rushing through her. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I know," he said, "but I've been thinking about you. About what you did. About the decision you made." There was a pause, and Jasmine held her breath, unsure of what to say next. "I just wanted to check in," Victor continued, his tone more personal than it had ever been. "I wanted to know how you're doing. How you're finding your new life." Jasmine's mind raced. She hadn't expected this kind of conversation, not from Victor, who had always kept his emotions locked away behind a veil of power. But here he was, reaching out to her in a way that felt genuine. "I'm doing well," she said softly. "I'm building something for myself, and it feels right. It's not easy, but it's worth it." "I'm glad to hear that," Victor replied. "You've always been capable of so much more than I ever gave you credit for. I see that now." His words struck a chord with Jasmine. It was the kind of validation she had never expected, especially from someone like him. It made her realize how far she had come in such a short time. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. For giving me the chance to choose." "You didn't need me to give you a chance," Victor replied, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "You always had the power to choose, Jasmine. I just wanted to make sure you knew that." There was a long pause, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. The silence between them was comfortable, but it also held a deeper meaning. They both knew that their lives had changed, in ways that were irreversible. Jasmine could feel the weight of her decision settling on her. She had chosen this new path for herself, and now, she was seeing the fruits of her labor. But there was something else, something that lingered in her heart. The connection she had shared with Victor, the respect they had for each other, was something she didn't want to lose. It had been a turning point in her life, and she realized that it had shaped her in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. "I'm glad we talked," Jasmine said finally, breaking the silence. "I never thought I'd hear from you again, but I'm glad you reached out." "You're welcome," Victor said, his tone warm. "I'll always be here, Jasmine. You made a choice, and I respect that. But if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "I won't," she said, her voice steady. "Thank you, Victor." And with that, they ended the conversation. Jasmine sat there for a moment, letting the words settle in her mind. She had made a choice, and it was one that had led her to a new life, a life she had created for herself. She had left the mansion, left the past behind, but she had also carried the lessons with her. The lesson that she had the power to choose, the power to shape her own destiny. And for the first time, she truly understood what that meant. I hope you're ready because Jasmine's path is about to take another profound step forward. After her conversation with Victor, she felt an unexpected sense of calm settling over her. She had made her choice, and though the weight of it was still fresh, it felt like the right decision. Her life had been a series of small, measured steps, but now, for the first time, she felt like she was taking control. She had left the mansion, the place that had once been her world. Now, she was venturing into new territory, a world full of possibilities, but also uncertainty. Jasmine still spent most of her time working at the small business, and as she settled into her new routine, a quiet pride began to fill her. She was doing well. She had gained more responsibility at work, taking on a greater role in the office. Her ideas were being heard, her opinions valued. It was everything she had wanted. Yet, as the weeks passed, Jasmine found herself longing for something more. She had always lived her life to please others, to stay invisible, to do what was expected. But now, she was beginning to realize that she had the power to do more than just exist. She could thrive. She wanted to continue growing, learning, and pushing herself. One afternoon, while on her lunch break, Jasmine sat at a small table at the cafe near her office. The weather had turned warm, and the streets were buzzing with the energy of a busy city afternoon. She was lost in thought, sipping her coffee, when she noticed a familiar figure walking down the street. It was Sophia, the head housekeeper from the mansion. Jasmine had not seen her since she left the mansion, and for a brief moment, she wondered if she should avoid her, unsure of what to say. But then, Sophia looked up and saw her. Without hesitation, she walked over and smiled. "Jasmine," she said warmly, taking a seat across from her. "It's so good to see you." "Sophia," Jasmine replied, a little surprised. "What are you doing here?" Sophia laughed softly. "I could ask you the same thing. But I'm actually here for a meeting. I didn't expect to run into you." There was a brief pause, and Jasmine felt a mix of emotions. Seeing Sophia again brought back memories of her time in the mansion, memories of being in the shadows, working tirelessly, unnoticed. But now, with the changes in her life, it was different. "It's good to see you," Jasmine said sincerely, smiling back at Sophia. "I've been doing well. It's been a big change, but I think it's the right one." Sophia nodded, her smile turning soft. "I'm glad to hear that. You always had so much potential, Jasmine. It's good to see you stepping into it." The compliment took Jasmine by surprise, and for a moment, she didn't know how to respond. But then, she realized that Sophia was one of the few people who had always seen her, who had always known she was capable of more. "Thank you," Jasmine said quietly, her voice filled with gratitude. "It's been hard, but I'm learning that I can do more than I thought." They talked for a while longer, sharing updates about their lives, the changes they had gone through, and the paths they were now walking. Sophia told Jasmine that she had also moved on from the mansion, though she had found a position in another luxury home management company. The conversation was light, but there was a sense of camaraderie between them. Two women, each finding their way in a world that had once seemed so confining. As they parted ways, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of determination. Sophia had been a reminder that she was not alone in this journey, that others had made their own choices to change their lives, and that she too could continue to evolve. The next morning, as she prepared for another day at work, Jasmine found herself reflecting on her journey. The past few months had been transformative. She had left the mansion, she had stepped into a new life, and she was finally starting to realize her own worth. But there was still so much more to explore. Jasmine knew that she wasn't done yet. She had come so far, but she wasn't ready to stop. She had learned that life was about more than just surviving. It was about living, about making choices, and about embracing the unknown. The world was vast, full of opportunities, and Jasmine was ready to take it all on. The next chapter of her life was just beginning. She was no longer the maid in the shadows, the one who went unnoticed. She was someone with a voice, with power, and with the freedom to choose her path. And as she walked into the office that day, she felt something she had never felt before: confidence. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore. She was living, fully and completely, and for the first time, she realized that she was in control of her own future. I hope you're ready for what's coming next, because Jasmine's life is about to take another step forward. It had been a few months since she left the mansion, and as the days passed, Jasmine found herself adapting to the new rhythm of her life. Her job at the small business had become more than just a source of income. It was a place where she could grow, learn, and explore her potential. The once quiet and reserved woman was now becoming someone who took charge, someone who believed in her own worth. Jasmine had always been good at what she did. She was organized, hardworking, and efficient. But now, she was learning new skills, building relationships with her coworkers, and developing confidence in her abilities. Every day felt like an opportunity to move closer to the person she wanted to be. Still, there were moments when Jasmine found herself questioning everything. The freedom she had gained was exhilarating, but it also came with its challenges. There were days when the uncertainty of her future felt overwhelming, when she wasn't sure what direction to take next. But despite these moments of doubt, Jasmine knew that she was on the right path. Her life was her own, and she had the power to shape it however she saw fit. One afternoon, while working on a new project at the office, Jasmine received an unexpected phone call. It was from Sophia, the head housekeeper from the mansion. It had been a while since they last spoke, and Jasmine wasn't sure what to expect. "Jasmine," Sophia's voice came through the phone, warm and familiar. "I hope you're doing well." "I'm doing great," Jasmine replied, smiling at the sound of Sophia's voice. "It's been a busy few months, but I'm adjusting. How about you?" Sophia's laughter was light and easy. "I'm doing well, too. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something." Jasmine's curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" "Well," Sophia began, "I know you've been working hard to build a new life, and I've been so proud of how far you've come. But there's something else. The mansion is changing, and I wanted to give you a heads up." Jasmine's brow furrowed slightly, unsure of what Sophia meant. "What do you mean by changing?" "The Castellano family," Sophia explained. "They've made some decisions about the future of the house. And with those changes, they might need someone to step in, someone who can help manage things. I thought of you, Jasmine." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The mansion, the place she had left behind, was reaching out to her. But she wasn't the same person who had walked away from it all. She had changed, grown. Her life now was full of possibilities, full of freedom. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that anymore," Jasmine said, her voice uncertain. "I've moved on, Sophia. I'm building a life for myself." "I know," Sophia said, her tone understanding. "But I just wanted you to know that the opportunity is there if you ever want it. I don't want to pressure you, but I thought you should know." Jasmine sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing. She had worked so hard to escape the constraints of the mansion, to create a life that was hers, free from the expectations and limitations she had once known. The idea of returning felt like a step backward, but at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pull of what had once been her life. "Thank you for letting me know, Sophia," Jasmine said finally, her voice steady. "I appreciate it, but I think I need to keep moving forward. I don't want to go back to that life." "I understand," Sophia replied softly. "But whatever you choose, I'll always support you, Jasmine. You're stronger than you think." Jasmine hung up the phone, a sense of clarity settling over her. She had made her decision. The mansion, the life she had once known, was part of her past now. She didn't need to look back. She had come too far to turn around. The thought of staying in the same place, of returning to the life she had left behind, didn't feel right anymore. It wasn't just about escaping her past. It was about embracing her future, one where she called the shots, where she made the choices. The next few weeks passed by quickly. Jasmine continued to excel in her new job, her confidence growing with each passing day. She was starting to make a name for herself, not just as a hard worker, but as someone with a vision, someone with ideas to contribute. Her coworkers began to take notice, and her manager had even started offering her more responsibilities. Jasmine's world was expanding, and she could feel herself becoming the woman she had always wanted to be. But there were still moments when she missed the sense of security the mansion had once provided. The grand halls, the luxury, the certainty of knowing what was expected of her. Sometimes, those memories tugged at her. But Jasmine knew that the life she had now was the one she had chosen, and it was hers to build. The uncertainty she had once feared was now something she embraced. She had made it this far, and there was nothing holding her back. She was finally in control of her destiny, and nothing, not even the pull of the past, could change that. I hope you're ready for the next phase in Jasmine's journey, as her life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. The weeks had passed, and each day felt like a new chapter. Jasmine was no longer the quiet, uncertain woman who had walked away from the mansion. She had evolved into someone who believed in her own strength, someone who had taken charge of her destiny. Her job at the small business had become a new home, a place where she was not only valued for her hard work, but where she was encouraged to grow. Her confidence had blossomed, and with each challenge, she proved to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. The fear she once felt, the uncertainty that held her back, had begun to fade into the background. But life, as it often does, had a way of throwing unexpected twists. One afternoon, as Jasmine walked into her office, she noticed something was different. The atmosphere in the office was buzzing with excitement, but there was a sense of tension in the air that she couldn't quite place. Her coworkers were whispering in hushed tones, and the usual hum of activity seemed to be filled with an underlying anticipation. "What's going on?" Jasmine asked her colleague, Mia, as she passed by. Mia glanced over at her, her eyes wide with excitement. "The company is expanding," Mia said, barely able to contain her excitement. "They're opening a new office in another city, and they want to promote someone to manage the new branch." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. The news was unexpected, but it felt like an opportunity, a chance to step into a bigger role, to challenge herself even further. She had worked hard to get where she was, and the idea of taking on more responsibility was both thrilling and intimidating. "Do you think you're going to apply?" Mia asked, her tone filled with curiosity. Jasmine hesitated. The thought of moving, of taking on a role in a new city, was both exciting and overwhelming. But then, she thought of everything she had overcome. She had left the mansion, left behind a life that had been safe but limiting, and now she was facing a new challenge. "I think I might," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "I think I'm ready for something new." The decision wasn't easy, but Jasmine had learned to trust her instincts. She had taken control of her life before, and she could do it again. The next few days were filled with uncertainty as Jasmine weighed her options. The opportunity to move and manage the new office was a significant step forward, but it also meant leaving behind everything she had worked so hard to build in the city she had come to love. She had to decide if she was ready for that next big leap. As the deadline for applying approached, Jasmine found herself thinking about her journey. How far she had come since walking away from the mansion, how much she had grown, and how much she had learned about herself. She had gone from being someone who lived in the shadows to someone who was beginning to step into the light. The choice wasn't just about the job or the move. It was about embracing her potential, about continuing to grow and challenge herself. And so, one evening, after a long day at work, Jasmine sat at her kitchen table, pen in hand, ready to make her decision. She thought back to all the people who had supported her, Sophia, Victor, her co-workers, and how far she had come because of them. She realized that, in a way, this was her moment. She wasn't just applying for a new job, she was choosing to take ownership of her future. She filled out the application, each word a step toward something new, something that would continue to shape her journey. As she clicked submit, a wave of relief washed over her. She had done it. The decision had been made. Jasmine didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer afraid to embrace it. A week later, Jasmine received the news she had been waiting for. She had been selected to manage the new branch in the other city. The feeling that washed over her was indescribable. It was a mixture of excitement, pride, and anticipation. She had done it. She had taken that leap, and it had paid off. But more than anything, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons she had learned, for the support she had received, and for the strength she had discovered within herself. The city was buzzing with new possibilities, and Jasmine knew that this was just the beginning. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to make it exactly what she wanted it to be. She packed her bags, said goodbye to the familiar, and took the next step toward the life she had always dreamed of. She had come so far, and now, the whole world was in front of her. Jasmine was no longer just surviving. She was living, thriving, and ready for whatever came next.